There's a photograph that has circulated since the accident that captures something both beautiful and heartbreaking. It shows Dennis Dutton in his Delta Airlines captain's uniform, standing proudly beside his son Jack, who's wearing an Auburn University aviation program shirt. Father and son, both pilots, both passionate about aviation, one with decades of professional experience flying the biggest jets in the world, the other just beginning his journey studying at one of the country's premier collegiate flight programs, dreaming of following in his father's footsteps. They're smiling in that photograph. They look happy, they look like they have their whole futures ahead of them. And then, on a January morning that should have been routine, both of them died together in the same aircraft, victims of an accident that 40 years of airline flying somehow didn't prepare Dennis to prevent. Today, we're going to tell the story of Dennis Dutton, examine his remarkable career flying for one of the world's premier airlines, understand why his son Jack was following the same path, and confront the uncomfortable question of why experience that kept Dennis safe for 4 decades in airline cockpits didn't translate to survival in a business jet emergency. Dennis Dutton was 67 years old at the time of his death. That means he had lived a full life, a life centered around aviation, a life defined by the profession he loved. He wasn't just a pilot who happened to work for an airline. He was a career aviator who had dedicated his adult life to flying, who had achieved the pinnacle of the profession by becoming a captain at a major carrier, who had accumulated thousands upon thousands of hours in cockpits, who had seen and done things that only a small percentage of pilots ever experience. His career at Delta Airlines spanned decades. While we don't have access to his complete employment records, we can piece together his professional history from publicly available information, from FAA airman records, from statements made by family and friends. Dennis flew for Delta during an era when the airline grew from a primarily domestic carrier to a global powerhouse. He would have seen the evolution of aviation technology, from older generation aircraft to modern glass cockpits and fly-by-wire systems. He would have flown routes across the United States and internationally, experiencing the full range of weather conditions, airports, and operational challenges that airline flying presents. To become a captain at Delta Airlines is no small achievement. It requires not just flying skill, but also years of seniority, extensive training, demonstrated leadership ability, and the respect of your peers. You don't become a Delta captain by being mediocre or careless. You get there by being consistently good at your job, year after year, flight after flight, safely transporting hundreds of thousands of passengers over millions of miles. Dennis would have completed recurrent training every 6 months throughout his career. Simulator sessions where every conceivable emergency is practiced until responses are automatic. Engine failures, hydraulic failures, electrical failures, pressurization problems, weather challenges, everything that can go wrong in a modern airliner. He would have been tested regularly both in simulators and in line checks where check airmen observed his performance during actual flights. He would have participated in crew resource management training, learning the human factors and communication skills that prevent accidents in multi-crew environments. His logbook, if we could see it, would tell the story of a career. Thousands of entries, hundreds of different aircraft, flights to hundreds of different airports, night flights, day flights, good weather, challenging weather, routine operations, and occasional abnormal events that required all of his training and experience to handle safely. Every flight where he transported passengers safely, every landing where everyone walked off the aircraft alive. Every challenge he successfully navigated, that's the record of 4 decades of professional flying. And through all of those flights, through all of those years, through all of those challenges, Dennis kept people safe. There's no record of accidents or incidents involving him during his airline career. He was, by all available evidence, exactly the kind of pilot passengers want in the cockpit: experienced, professional, safety-focused, someone you could trust with your life, and thousands of people did exactly that over his career. Dennis retired from Delta, as many pilots do, at the mandatory retirement age of 65 for airline pilots. Retirement from the airlines doesn't mean retirement from flying for many pilots. The love of aviation doesn't end just because you can't fly for the airlines anymore. Many retired airline pilots continue flying in general aviation, either for recreation or in corporate roles or doing contract flying. They have decades of experience and skills that are still valuable, even if they can't fly for scheduled passenger carriers anymore. For Dennis, retirement meant an opportunity to fly different aircraft, to experience different types of aviation. At some point, he obtained a type rating for the Cessna Citation 500 series. This required additional training, check rides, demonstration of proficiency in the aircraft. It represented Dennis expanding his aviation experience beyond the large Boeing and Airbus jets he'd flown for Delta into the world of business aviation. But Dennis's most important legacy wasn't his professional accomplishments or his flight hours or his ratings. It was his son, Jack. Jack Dutton was 21 years old, a junior at Auburn University in their professional flight program. Auburn's aviation program is well respected, producing graduates who go on to careers with airlines, corporate flight departments, and other professional aviation roles. It's a rigorous program that combines academic coursework with flight training, preparing students for the realities of professional flying. Jack was following in his father's footsteps. He had grown up around aviation, had probably spent time as a child visiting his dad at the airport, maybe even riding in cockpit jump seats on flights when regulations allowed. He had seen firsthand what a career in aviation could be, had been inspired by his father's example, had chosen the same path for his own life. By age 21, Jack had already accumulated significant flying experience and training. He held a private pilot certificate for single-engine land aircraft. He had recently earned his instrument rating, a major milestone in pilot training that qualifies you to fly in instrument meteorological conditions using only cockpit instruments. These accomplishments showed Jack's commitment and progress. He was doing well in the program, was building toward the commercial certificate and flight instructor ratings that would be next steps in his training. For Dennis, watching his son pursue aviation must have been immensely satisfying. He could see Jack developing the same passion for flying that had defined his own life. He could mentor his son, could share experiences and knowledge, could help Jack avoid the mistakes every young pilot makes. He could envision Jack eventually flying for an airline, maybe even Delta, carrying on the family tradition. That photograph of them together, Dennis in his Delta uniform and Jack in his Auburn aviation shirt, captures that relationship perfectly. A father proud of his son, a son admiring his father and wanting to follow the same path. Both of them sharing a love of aviation that transcended just a job or a hobby. It was a calling, a passion, something that connected them across generations, and that's what makes their deaths together so particularly tragic. They weren't just two people who happened to be on the same flight. They were father and son, connected by blood and by their shared love of flying, dying together in the pursuit of that shared passion. For the Dutton family, the loss isn't just one person or two people. It's the loss of two generations, the loss of a family's aviation legacy, the loss of the relationship between father and son. Now we have to confront the difficult question at the heart of this tragedy. Why didn't Dennis's 40 years of airline experience prevent this accident? Why didn't his thousands of hours, his decades of professional training, his experience handling emergencies in simulators and occasionally in real aircraft, why didn't any of that translate to survival when the Citation's engine failed? The uncomfortable answer is that airline experience, while valuable, doesn't automatically translate to success in general aviation, because the operational environments are fundamentally different in ways that matter enormously during emergencies. Let's examine those differences and how they might have contributed to the accident. First, aircraft performance characteristics. During his Delta career, Dennis flew large transport category jets, Boeing 737s, 757s, 767s, possibly Airbus A320 family or other types. These aircraft share certain performance characteristics that are very different from business jets like the Citation. Large airline jets have enormous power margins. Boeing 757 has two engines each producing 40,000 pounds of thrust. If you lose one engine, you still have 40,000 pounds from the remaining engine, which is more than sufficient to climb, maneuver, and return to land safely. Single-engine performance on a 757 is robust. You can climb at well over 1,000 feet per minute on one engine. You can easily maintain altitude. You can maneuver without significant performance degradation. An engine failure on a 757 is a serious abnormal event that requires executing appropriate procedures, but it's not immediately life-threatening if handled properly. You have capability, you have options, you have margins. The Citation II is a very different aircraft. It has two small turbofan engines, each producing 2,500 pounds of thrust. Losing one engine means losing not just half your thrust, but more than half your effective capability, because the dead engine creates drag. Single-engine climb performance at high weight is marginal, maybe 200 to 400 feet per minute under good conditions. You might not be able to maintain altitude depending on weight, temperature, and altitude. The margins are thin. If Dennis's mental model of single-engine performance was based on 40 years of flying 757s and other large jets, he might have expected the Citation to perform much better on one engine than it actually could. He might have believed that turning back immediately was safe because it would be safe in a 757. He might have thought Configuring with gear down wouldn't dramatically reduce performance because it wouldn't in a 757. His instincts, shaped by tens of thousands of hours in aircraft with very different characteristics, might have been completely wrong for the citation. Second, crew coordination and workload management. Throughout his airline career, Dennis flew with highly qualified first officers. Every person who sat in the right seat of his aircraft had at minimum a commercial pilot certificate with instrument rating, multi-engine rating, and a type rating for that specific aircraft. They had completed the same training Dennis had. They were current and proficient. They were capable of fully sharing the workload during emergencies. When an engine fails in an airline environment, the crew response is highly structured. The pilot flies the aircraft, maintains control, maintains proper speed and altitude. The pilot not flying immediately begins the engine failure checklist, identifying the failed engine, verifying the failure, beginning shutdown procedures. Workload is divided, no one person is overwhelmed, the crew works together as a trained team. But on the citation flight, the crew composition was very different. We have evidence suggesting that Jack Dutton, who held only a single-engine private pilot certificate with no multi-engine rating, I was in the right seat. If Jack wasn't qualified to run checklists, to manage systems, to provide the level of support that an airline first officer would provide, then Dennis was effectively flying alone. He was trying to do the job of two airline pilots by himself while also dealing with a catastrophic emergency at low altitude. Dennis's airline experience might actually have worked against him here. His expectation, based on 40 years of professional flying, would be that the person in the right seat could handle certain tasks, could run checklists, could manage systems. If he assigned tasks to Jack expecting them to be accomplished and they weren't because Jack didn't have the training or experience to do them, that would create confusion and potentially dangerous gaps in the emergency response. Third, decision-making under uncertainty. Airline operations are highly structured with very clear procedures for almost every situation. Engine failure after takeoff in a large jet has a clear response: maintain control, maintain speed, continue the takeoff and climb to a safe altitude, then run appropriate checklists and either continue to destination or return to departure airport. The decision tree is clear. The procedures are well established. You train for this scenario repeatedly in simulators. But in the citation at Statesville, operating under Part 91 in marginal VFR from a non-towered airport, the environment was much less structured. No ATC providing guidance. No company procedures mandating specific responses. More flexibility, but also more responsibility to make the right decisions based on conditions and circumstances. This less structured environment might have been unfamiliar to someone who spent 40 years in the highly structured airline environment. Additionally, if the engine failure was caused by an open baggage door and foreign object ingestion, as evidence suggests, Dennis would have been dealing with ambiguous information. Loud noises, possible vibration, possible visual anomalies, with uncertainty about what exactly had happened and whether there was additional damage. The airline training for engine failures assumes a relatively clear failure mode. This was chaotic and confusing, creating uncertainty that might have affected decision-making. Fourth, recency and proficiency in type. Even if Dennis had significant citation experience, which we don't know for certain, his recency in the aircraft might have been limited compared to his years of airline flying. Recency matters in aviation. Skills degrade without practice, instincts become less sharp. If Dennis had flown citations only occasionally since retirement, while the vast majority of his flying career was in airline jets, his proficiency in the citation might not have been as high as his overall experience would suggest. The muscle memory, the instinctive responses, the deep familiarity that comes from flying the same aircraft type day after day for years, Dennis had that for airline jets. He might not have had it for the citation, and in an emergency where you have seconds to respond, where you don't have time to consciously think through every action, you rely on that muscle memory and those instincts. If they're not well developed in the specific aircraft you're flying, your responses might be slower or less appropriate. There's also the factor of single pilot operations versus crew operations. Even if Dennis had a single pilot exemption for the citation, which available records suggest he didn't, flying single pilot is fundamentally different from flying as part of a two-person crew. Airline pilots spend their entire careers operating in crew environments. They're trained to divide workload, to use the other pilot as a resource to operate as a team. Transitioning to single pilot operations, or to operations where you're effectively single pilot because your right-seater isn't qualified to help much, requires a different mindset and different skills. None of this is meant to criticize Dennis Dutton. He was by all accounts an excellent pilot with a distinguished career. But this accident illustrates that excellence in one aviation environment doesn't automatically guarantee excellence in a different environment. The skills and instincts that served Dennis well for 40 years in airline cockpits might not have fully transferred to flying a business jet in an unstructured Part 91 environment with a less capable crew. For Jack Dutton, the tragedy is that his aviation career was just beginning. He had so much potential, so much to learn, so many experiences ahead of him. He was training at a good school, was making progress toward his goals, had a father who could mentor him and guide him. His death at 21, just as his life was really starting, is a profound loss of potential. For the Dutton family, losing both Dennis and Jack in the same accident is incomprehensible. A wife and mother lost her husband and son together. Siblings lost their father and brother. Extended family lost two beloved members. The family's aviation legacy, the tradition of flying that Dennis established and Jack was carrying forward, ended in an instant. The title of this video states that 40 years flying for Delta couldn't prepare Dennis for this emergency. That's not a criticism of Delta's training or Dennis's abilities. It's a recognition that different aviation environments require different skills and create different challenges. Airline flying is excellent preparation for airline flying. But business jet flying in a Part 91 environment with minimal crew support and marginal weather requires additional skills and different decision-making that decades of airline experience might not fully develop. The lessons for the aviation community are several. First, recognize that experience in one aircraft or operation doesn't automatically transfer to different aircraft or operations. Humble yourself to the learning curve even if you have thousands of hours. Second, understand the performance limitations of the specific aircraft you're flying. Don't assume it will perform like other aircraft you have experience in. Third, ensure you have adequate crew support. If you're required to have a second in command, make sure they're actually qualified and capable of helping during emergencies, not just legally present. Fourth, maintain proficiency through recurrent training specific to the aircraft you're flying. The training that kept you safe in airline jets won't necessarily keep you safe in business jets. Fifth, recognize that the less structured environment of Part 91 operations requires different decision-making skills than highly structured airline operations. You have more flexibility, but also more responsibility to make the right choices. Dennis Dutton's 40-year career at Delta Airlines was distinguished and successful. He kept countless passengers safe. He mentored junior pilots. He represented the best of professional aviation. His son Jack was following that same path of excellence, learning the skills and earning the certifications that would lead to his own professional career. Their deaths together represent not just individual tragedy, but the loss of an aviation family legacy. If you found this story meaningful, if you want to honor Dennis and Jack's memory by learning from this tragedy, subscribe to this channel. Share this video with others in the aviation community who need to understand that experience, while valuable, isn't a guarantee of safety in unfamiliar environments. And remember that every pilot, no matter how experienced, needs to respect the learning curve when transitioning to new aircraft or new operational environments. Thank you for watching.